level of regulation. Second, the most obvious way in which we contribute is by actually doing business in a sustainable and responsible way. When people are negotiating in this area, typically there will be a range of monetary and non-monetary benefits that can be discussed. And equally, some of the benefits are things that can be delivered now, some of them are deferred benefits. And negotiating access will involve discussing a package of benefits. The scale and type of benefits that are appropriate cannot be standardised. It depends on the nature of the transaction, but it also depends on the wider objectives of the two parties. So particularly if you're negotiating with an emerging or developing country, this may have implications around what their economic development strategy is. So it's important that the regime recognises this range of benefits formally and acknowledges this diverse range, and that it provides the parties the space to reach mutually beneficial agreements by putting as few restrictions as possible on what can be agreed between partners. And I think, if you link this together with the previous slide, you can see the sort of tools I was describing before can contribute to providing some degree of security in that process. The last bullet on this slide is about penalisation of the compliant, which is a difficult issue to present, but our conception of this regime is one in which contracts based on mutually agreed terms have a central place. One of the concerns, or one of the political impetuses within the negotiations, has been a concern with tracking, verification, transparency downstream of the initial access negotiations. And there is a very delicate line that governments have to tread here, because if mechanisms for tracking and verification, people talk about checkpoints and disclosure requirements and so on, if these things become too burdensome, they will actually mean the contracts aren't actually written. They will also mean that it won't just be a question of burden, but when drafting a contract or when making an agreement, people will not be sure if the government is going to come in and second guess at a later stage the nature of that contract. So there is a real balance that has to be struck here, and people have to look very carefully, in addition, at the cost and benefit of the various compliance regimes that have been put forward. Some of the things I've seen in the discussion of the IR have been quite staggering in how much they would cost, and how, in our view, how little they would actually yield in terms of concrete benefit. So I think our emphasis would be, most of our members want to act within the rules of the regime. In fact, I think all our members want to act within the rules of the regime. When people talk about compliance, we would encourage the parties who are negotiating an international regime to focus on how are they going to deal with a non-compliant, whether it's through sanctions or indeed through education, because what's quite clear to us is a lot of people out there, they don't know what the CPD is and they have no idea whatsoever what the IR is, except in the US they probably think it's the internal revenue. But there's a lot you can do with education, but you need to focus your compliance efforts not on the people who have every interest in being compliant, but the people who are not going to be, either willfully or because of ignorance. Hence, avoid penalisation of the compliant. Final point, commitment to implementation and address problems. we are committed to the outcome of these negotiations, and we believe that we can help progress national implementation. Many countries lack national access and benefit sharing regimes. We view these as a fundamental building block of the international regime. So companies may be able to offer experience of different legal regimes, and may be able to offer experience of things like technology transfer practices in the public sector, for example, because the regime at national level is not just a law with a focal point. It can be other things as well. We can also offer case studies of effective partnerships. You've seen some of those today. We have done that repeatedly in the CBD meetings to try and tell people what works in our sector. So what we want from the regime is a focus on building national capacity. We do understand that for some countries they put a high priority on the international regime as a way of reinforcing national action. But actually what we're talking about here is the acquisition of materials. It happens at national level. You can't compensate for what's not working properly at national level with an international regime. The national regimes are the building block. We also hope to see a sort of a fact-based and proportionate approach to contentious issues. There have been lots of controversy in this area around biopiracy and misappropriation and other issues, and I think it's to the credit actually of some of the parties, including Peru, who were mentioned earlier, but other parties as well, and some of the international institutions, that they have actually systematically commissioned work to try and establish what are the facts behind these concerns. And there is really quite a substantial body of detailed work now, which we hope the negotiators are going to draw on, and we hope people will draw on in dealing with future controversies. And finally, we would like to see a partnership-based approach. We would like to see the regime work, and we do believe we have something to contribute. So, if what we're concerned about is a sector-specific contract-based system rooted in national ABS regimes, I guess it provokes the question of what is the international regime for? It's not a substitute for adequate national systems. We do believe it can help fill gaps. It can build capacity for implementation of national regimes and negotiation of mutually agreed terms. So we see it as not just a document which sits in the CBD somewhere, but something that can be more dynamic and actually continue to evolve. And it should monitor progress towards the achievement of CBD objectives. We would also encourage going forward, as I said, on the face of it, the negotiators of the international regime have a challenge at the moment to get to consensus in 11 months' time. And we would encourage them to take a pragmatic approach, and there may be things that they have to deal with downstream. They have to say, okay, let's get something on the table, let's deal with other things on a sort of practical and gap analysis basis, and say, where have we really got problems? That may take time. So, conclusions, I think I've overrun, so I'll put them all up. First of all, the regime should respect and reflect CBD, the mandate given. We believe that provider flexibility, user-friendliness are key. We are trying to rekindle something here. Scope, substance and security must be right. These are just requirements of international business, and the business will not be done if they're not right. The regime needs to guide. It needs to be a sort of to move the national regimes forward and support them as much as to dictate what they should do. We need to be quite selective about where the sort of model I've described doesn't work and where there are gaps, and pick those up. Something that hasn't been done at all so far, particularly in relation to the many ambitious compliance ideas that have been put forward, No one has worked out the costs or benefits. Haven't seen it. So let's not go to implementation before we've done that. And finally, we believe that disclosure obligations in patents are a distraction. They are not going to add anything and should not be pursued. I'm sorry for... and we should be involved. But sorry for overrunning.